What up, y'all? It's your girl, Dr. CBS, and I am here with what is perhaps some bittersweet news about the end of The Last Dope Intellectual. And it's just me solo dolo because, I started the podcast. And so it's sort of my responsibility to speak about why it is coming to an end. So, I guess the first thing that I will say is that, when you start something individually, no matter how much you try to sort of collectivize it or make it a cooperative or a collaborative effort, and at the end of the day, it's still kind of like your thing. You know what I mean? And that is for good or for ill, right? So a lot of the responsibility continues to fall on you. At the same time that you might also, like, as an individual, prioritize like your ideas or your impulses going into a thing. And this is not to say that other people don't put in tremendous amounts of work, as was the case with The Last Dope Intellectual, from sort of Jared, who was the first producer, to 2Black, the current producer, to Layla, my co-host, who began in season 1, kind of making regular appearances. So everybody, there's a tremendous amount of labor that goes into it. But ultimately, like, your thing remains your thing. This is why it's very important to have things start out collectively from the outset. So even if you have an idea, bring everybody in on the front end, because that will sort of guard against the kind of like proprietary issues that can come up. But anyway, so that's the first thing. And then the second thing, so The Last Dope Intellectual started simply because it was right when around the time that the panty had hit, the pandemic. I was just like, man, I remember I tweeted like, oh, I would like to have a little segment or a section on somebody else's podcast. And I remember immediately Jared Ball, Dr. Jab, responded and was like, oh, you should have something on I Mix What I Like or whatever. And then as time went on, the idea just developed about me having my own podcast. And then it was very fortuitous because that was also around the time that Black Power Media was coming into formation. And so it made sense for me to have my own podcast to add to content for Black Power Media. So The Last Dope Intellectual was actually one of the flagship programs for Black Power Media. And then the overall point was just to have interesting, like, radical Black conversations, to share and produce knowledge in a different way. So my primary mode is writing, obviously, because I'm an academic. And so, I was very interested at a certain point to share knowledge in a different way, but also to sort of democratize, right, to spread the things that I had written already to a broader or a popular audience. So just to kind of renew the base of who that work was actually for. And so LDI was a great way to do that, along with having some amazing conversations with scholars, a lot of friends, a lot of kind of close comrades we had on the show, mostly academic, but also some people in like Black Alliance for Peace, community movement builders, and other organizations. And so it just has been a great platform to have those types of conversations. And also importantly, like LDI season 2 in particular was a way for like Layla and I to work together and offer like our unique perspective as friends, as colleagues, as interlocutors, and also having, the productive tensions in terms of our linked but different kind of ideologies. And so it provided an amazing opportunity to do that. Like, so they say like one of the best ways to like develop or to sustain a relationship is to work on something together. And so we were very fortunate to have that opportunity. And so I thank very much Layla and 2Black, as well as Jared, for all the work that went into putting LDI together, right? And so the Talk Black, I don't know if y'all remember the Talk Black from the morning show. That was kind of like the the sort of precursor to season 2 of The Last Dope Intellectual, because that was the segment that Layla and I did together on the morning show. One time when Layla was away, Two Black was our impromptu co-host, and we talked to Yannick Marshall that week. And so it just made sense for season 2 to be in this particular formation. The other thing that I'll say is that, it turned into like really kind of like an interview show. We had our Shoot the Shit segment, we had other segments, but it really turned into us interviewing people about their work. And that wasn't necessarily the intent of LDI in terms of its original conceptualization. And it wasn't something that I really loved. Like, I liked having the conversations, but it wasn't kind of what I wanted to do with the platform. So, so that's sort of in the mix, and a segue into talking about sort of why we're moving on from LDI. And so this has been an ongoing conversation. So it may seem abrupt to you all, but like, it's something like very early on, I just always felt a little bit strange about having a podcast, not least because around the time that LDI dropped, everybody was having a podcast. Celebrities were trying to get some of their money back that they were losing from not touring in the pandemic, and et cetera. And just everybody had a podcast. And so I always had the question of if this podcast, Last Dope Intellectual, was just adding to the noise. Now, granted, I do think our podcast is relatively unique, because Layla and I are academics, because it's like radical Black content. The balance between having sort of scholarly or academic conversations and conversations around organizing and other types of issues. So I do think that, I don't think we were replicating anything, but nonetheless, it's like, how many fucking podcasts do you need, right? And so, Layla will always bring up the point, well, there's millions of books, right? If not billions, and you still write books. So what's the difference between having many podcasts versus many books? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but it just I've always just had a little bit of a, and so the next question is whether having a podcast is like the best use of our time, or, of my time, right? At heart, I'm a writer. I love to write. Writing is the best way that I express myself. It's the way that I work out ideas. It's just a significant part of who I am, alongside reading and research. And so I also wondered if doing the podcast, because it takes a lot of work. I know, like, it's like what you all see is like 2 hours, but it takes, obviously, I'm sure many of you know, it just takes much longer than that. Like, there's the planning, and then I'm a ruminator. And so I'm somebody who thinks about things all the time. And so I'm always thinking about ideas, writing them down. I have a little notebook and all that type of stuff. And so, finding the guests, following up with them, sending them the questions, all those things take a lot of time, along with reading the books, all that stuff. And so, the second thing is like, is this the best use of our time and of my time, and kind of what it is that I want to be doing? And so at this point, the answer is ultimately, I'd rather be working on finishing up my first book, working on my second book project, and doing other forms of writing. I feel like I really got away from writing in the past year and a half to 2 years. I know it doesn't seem that way, because I am writing, I do be writing a lot, but it's not a sort of consistent writing practice and writing in the sort of different ways that I want to write at this point. And so that is there's just sort of like priorities have pivoted, if that makes sense. And then I'm starting a new job. So I have posted at this point, I'll be an associate professor of African-American studies at Wayne State. Layla is starting her new position once she returns from Germany at Northeastern University. And so we both have, we're both getting back to teaching and all of the other types of service and productivity responsibilities that come with starting those positions. And so that is another way that our time and our priorities are pivoting somewhat. And then there's these two ideas. The first is an input versus an output season. And I feel like perhaps for the last 18 months or so, I've been in a massive output season. So a lot of lectures, talks, interviews, and then the podcast. But I feel like now I'm in an input season. Like, I don't really feel like I have too much to say or offer at this point. that I haven't already said or talked about, even if it's in a variety of different ways. And so I just really want to study and think and have input, right? That is what I'm craving. I need a little bit more solitude, less engagement at this point. And the second aspect is sometimes, so this comes from Zora Neale Hurston, sometimes we have question years and sometimes we have answer years, right? And so I think that this period of my life is sort of an answer period. I feel like more focused, more in tune in what it is that I need to be doing for the next set of goals that I want to accomplish. And so this alignment of an input season and an answer year just requires me to give a little bit more to myself and to the types of intellectual production I want to be engaged in. And that's just a little bit of a shift from the sort of the alignment that created the conditions for LDI. So what is next? What can you expect? So basically, 1 week after this announcement drops, and then at the end of the month, we're going to delete the social media because even that takes work. Somebody has to manage it and post things up. So we're going to take that offline. Podcast episodes will still be available on YouTube in perpetuity. So that archive will be there. We're going to shut off the comments for that though, but you will always be able to access the previous LDI episodes. There'll be another month of the episodes on the audio side. So wherever you get your audio podcast, so it'll be there until the end of May. And then we will be shutting that down. And so it'll only be available on YouTube after the end of May. We're also shutting down our Patreon, but our Patreon will be up for the rest of the month to allow folks time to sort of pivot their donations elsewhere. So with the Patreon, the payments have been paused since we went on break at the end of March. So nobody's being charged right now, and they will continue to be paused, but we just want to give folks time to transition those donations to other platforms. So on that score, you might consider shifting your contributions, especially to Black Myths podcast. We love Black Myths. Black Myths podcast is the sort of companion podcast to LDI. It is Two Blacks podcast, so we really love if you would pivot your Patreon sponsorship there. You might also consider another favorite, Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. There's Erica Keynes, who has a Patreon and produces amazing content, mostly in written form, as well as Dev Springer or Danny Haifong. These are all people who are producing radical, revolutionary content and who would benefit greatly from Patreon support. Related to that, you might also, consider a monthly donation to Black Alliance for Peace, to Black Agenda Report, to Hood Communists, Community Movement Builders, or even some sponsorship for the No Name Book Club, so they can continue to send books and reading materials to their prison chapters. So those are all the different things. So let me just say, we so appreciate the generous donations on our Patreon. It's amazing. It's allowed us to be able to pay our producer, as we always say, and it really shows people's another form of commitment to the show other than watching and engaging. So thank you so much to everybody who became patrons, and we hope that you can pivot that money to other sort of worthwhile forms of podcasting or of blogging or whatever. On that score, you might also consider listening to other podcasts, right? And so one of the there are many hesitations or many forms of consternation, if you will, that, I've had about that I and we have had about stopping the podcast. And one is about sort of like, we are a radical Black podcast and there just aren't that many. But there are some, right? And that's what we have to remind ourselves, is that people are doing this work. People are making this content all the time. So you might consider, of course, listening to Black Myths, Black Agenda Radio, Hood Communist Radio, Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, Eugene Puryear's The Punch Out, of course, By Any Means Necessary with Jackie Luqman and Sean Blackman. Black Power Media has a variety of shows. And then The Malcolm Effect is another podcast. And so, really shifting that support to those other types of podcasts. Oh, also Burn It Down with Kim Brown, which is also, I feel like she's still on Friday. But anyway, there's so much other content, nothing that's exactly like ours, but there's so much other amazing and great content out there. So we hope that you'll continue to support left and Black left alternative media. So we're moving toward the end of, of this announcement video. But one thing I will say is that I'm going to start a blog. It's the Last Dope Intellectual blog. It's going to be on my my website, drcbs.com or dr-cbs.com. It's also linked to ChariceBurdenStelly.com, all one word. And so that's going to launch on Monday, May 16th, my birthday. Hey, so everybody wish me a happy birthday and send me all the things. So my blog is going to drop on Monday, May 16th. It will start out weekly and it might become more frequent, but it'll just be a combination of like academic writings, reflections on my writing process, some personal type of reflections, maybe some book reviews. I doubt it though, because I really don't love doing book reviews. And there will also be an audio component. So there might be some weeks where I will provide some type of audio or video content, but it will be mostly written based. And again, this is because I really want to get back and hone my writing practice. I want to be writing in all sorts of different forms. And I want writing to be the primary way that I am disseminating knowledge. So you can look forward to that, the Last Dope Intellectual blog, which will be on my website. I also just want to say I look forward to the next podcast that come about to fill this very tiny gap that will be left by the end of LDI. Like, I know people are creative and amazing, especially the younger generation. So I very much look forward to what it is that the next pair or group of radical Black dope intellectuals produce. And then I just want to thank all of you so much for tapping in over the past year or so. We've loved the conversations and the engagement, even some of the sort of debates that have happened in the chat or on social media. We are just so incredibly grateful and appreciative. And at the same time, we just hope that you'll respect this decision. There's not really too much further explanation that we have to offer. But again, we thank you so much for being LDIers, for being patrons, for tapping in to all of the different forms of content that we have produced, from our regular shows to our Black Radical brunches to our special live episodes. It's been such a pleasure. And we've enjoyed our foray into podcasting. I can only speak for myself. It was something that I wanted to kind of, dip my toe into to see how I liked it. I liked it okay, but I think that, again, I want to really focus on the work I'm doing in Black Alliance for Peace, as well as my sort of scholarly work. So with that said, thank you all again so very much. We can still be reached at our email address, which is thelastdopeintellectual@gmail.com, once the social media has gone away. And again, thank you so much. And, onward and upward, as they say, forward ever, backward never. Peace.